Andrew Thorburns' beliefs are not relevant to his role as Essendon CEO. It's his actions and behaviours that should be judged. We're going down a slippery slope if people cannot hold down a job or pursue their career based on their religious or moral beliefs. If we put the spotlight on everyday Aussies, a lot of people would be out of work. What's your thoughts?
Alan Oster, you know Andrew Thorburn. He was your CEO, wasn't he, before?
Professionally, I know him. So Chief Economist obviously has to talk to the CEO. I don't know him in the social sense. When I used to work with him, he always seemed to be very professional. He put a lot of emphasis on diversity and all those sort of things. So my sort of response is, I really don't know. And I think that is really a question that should be asked to the Essendon Football Club.
But you didn't see where his faith beliefs may have crossed over into his work life?
When I was there, I had no idea that he had strong religious beliefs. And in a bank, you sort of don't know that anyway. I think it's appropriate you don't know.
God and mammon, they say, don't they? Mehreen, Faruqi, one of the things that Andrew Thorburn has raised here is the concern that, you know, as Dean said, is this a slippery slope? Should people of faith now fear for their employment? Do you share that concern?
In any workplace, no one should be discriminated for the religious beliefs that they hold. But also, in a workplace, no one has free rein to express bigoted or hateful views as well. I think in this particular case, we have to separate out, I think, everyday Australians working in a workplace to someone who is a leader in their church.
He hadn't said this, and of course the comments had happened before he was chair of the church. But as leader, does he hold a responsibility?
Of course, you are a leader of an organisation which has expressed kind of anti-choice, homophobic views. So, you know, you have to take responsibility for that. And now you are being, you know, asked to be the CEO or are a CEO of an organisation who has different values, an organisation which has had, you know, issues as the whole football industry in terms of racism and homophobia and other discrimination. And this organisation is trying to change for better, to be more inclusive, to be more respectful. So I think that's the difference here. If your values clash or the two positions that you hold, their organisations' values clash, then you have to pick one or the other. I think that's what we are experiencing here.
Jonathan Sumption, call on your legal expertise, and this also puts me in mind of what the philosopher Hannah Arendt talked about when she talked about the right to have rights. Who has the right to have rights?
I don't think this is actually a question of rights or a question which law helps one to answer. Personally, I completely agree with the premise of Dean's question. I think that the only relevant question is whether he would be good at the job that he was appointed to. As I understand it, the reason why he was thought to be objectionable was his views on abortion. Abortion is one of the great moral issues of our time. I personally strongly believe that there should be a regulated right of abortion, but I'm certainly not going to say that those who take a morally different view are in some way objectionable or can't be employed by somebody whose function is nothing to do with abortion one way or the other.
Dean, just from the tone of your question, you're concerned that this could spread. Do you share that belief that there are others now who may be vulnerable?
I just think we need to be able to separate your beliefs from... He has a role as the Essendon CEO. It's completely irrelevant what his personal beliefs. I just think, slippery slope that it shouldn't really be considered. I guess the Essendon CEO is a high-profile case, so... but there'll be a lot of people, if you looked at any workforce, that have similar views as Andrew. Does it prevent them fulfilling their role? I'd argue it doesn't.
Amanda Rishworth, does this bring us back to the question about the need for a religious discrimination or anti-discrimination bill, which of course we'd seen debated in the previous parliament and that didn't get anywhere? Does this now increase the urgency to return to that?
Well, I don't know if this specific case suggests that we need to return to this, but I do think we do have to send a strong message, whether it is about sexual orientation, whether it's about race, or whether it is about being able to hold religious beliefs. There should be a right not to be discriminated against, and that right is very important. I think, though, as we talk about rights, there can be a tension between, for example, the right to free speech and how and when that's used, and where it crosses over to how it affects others. And I think that's always, when we talk about rights, there's also about a responsibility of how we make others feel. So
The problem is, and we saw this with the debate around religious discrimination before, is how do you square that circle? How do you meet all of the demands for inclusion and recognition of rights? For instance, now would someone at a religious school have the right to employ only someone who adheres to those religious beliefs?
Well, that actually does exist across our country, that teachers at religious schools can say that they would like to employ employees that have aligned values. So the circumstance that you talk around values being aligned actually does occur currently. But I think we have to be really clear that people do have the right to hold different beliefs. That is an important part of our multicultural country, our multi-faith country. But we also have a responsibility of how we all take personal responsibility in making sure we think of others as we go about what we do.
Of course, Jonathan, you know, in your country, it's a very diverse country. You also have an equality bill, don't you, a human rights bill. Is that enough to provide the protection necessary?
Yes, it is. In fact, we recently had a big case on this very subject, which concerned differences, very violently expressed differences of opinion about gender reassignment. And our Court of Appeal has ruled that that discrimination in employment on account of a person's beliefs on that subject is forbidden by statute. I personally applaud that decision because I think that we have got to learn to be tolerant of other people's opinions. People in an educated and diverse society are never going to agree about all that much. And life becomes impossible if we are not prepared to tolerate views that we strongly disagree with.
Having views that you disagree with is one thing. I think we all agree that people should be able to express views. However, when they cross over to the line of inciting violence or hate, and as we know, even with regard to, I mean, a lot of lay people talk about rights, and as if the right to free speech, for example, is absolute. It's not. It's always qualified. It's not an absolute right, and for those reasons. And so this is why I think, and I also sort of the language you're using about his leaving his job because of his association with the church. It's not the association with the church per se that's caused
it's the
this.
beliefs.
It's the beliefs. It's the views.
He made a choice. Is that the way these things should be dealt with, Francis? Is there a choice here? Do you end the association with the church, or do you end your employment with Essendon?
Well,
is that what it comes down to?
Ultimately, it comes down to a clash of values, and I think that those two values, those two organisations, are completely incompatible. And one, you can't, it's a sense of cognitive dissonance if you just say, well, that person can hold those. A person can be in those two organisations, and yet be leading an organisation which may have propagated. Discriminatory or bigotry views, and then on the other hand, you're working for an organisation that says it's inclusive and diverse. Those two things are not compatible. So there has to be a choice here.
And that's the choice you make.